Neil, it's over to you, thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks everyone for joining. As Helen said, today is Opsview Administration. So this builds a little on the Essentials course for any of those, well, for those of us who were on yesterday, and anyone who's somewhat familiar with Opsview but wants to get a little bit more out of the software. So we're going to cover BSM, the events and the graphs viewer, how to configure users and roles, creating service checks from scratch, and if there's time, we'll cover fine-tuning some of the alerts and the API, followed by any questions that we've had during the session. But I do want to start with a quick recap from the essentials and some of the differences we have between Opsview 5 and Opsview 6. So a host is a container of services. So the first thing you'll see when you sign into Opsview is a list of our host groups, our host statuses, and our service check statuses. So we've got host groups on the left, and these contain our various hosts. So I've got some web servers, some database servers, some networking kit, that kind of thing. And all of these have a status, and they all have associated service checks. So our hosts act as a container for our services, and a service is something we care about. So a service check checks things we're interested in, so my CPU usage, network throughput, disk space, that kind of thing. And all of that's done using plugins. So plugins are the scripts or the EXEs that do all of the monitoring logic, that do all the heavy lifting, they do all the hard work. We can organize all of these hosts and services into groups, and both host checks and service checks use plugins. So anything that shows the status here on the right hand side, so all of these, if we take a look at some of our MySQL checks, all of these run plugins, and it's the plugins which report the status of our services. We can create dashboards to share and view all that information, and we can create notification methods to share and view all that information too. So that's a very, very quick recap of what we covered yesterday. And for those of us who've maybe used Opsview previously, so you've used Opsview version 5, or maybe even a slightly older version, there's been a few improvements to Opsview 6. So if we're coming from version 5, the big thing is that we no longer use the old Nagios core engine. We don't use that open source Nagios monitoring tool, though we are fully compatible with Nagios. What this does mean is that results processing is significantly improved. Instead of the first in, last out, we've got most recent first. It means that reload times, if you're familiar with reload times or applying changes, 6 times faster than it used to be, depending on what we're actually applying. Of course, sometimes it's even faster than that, but on average it's around 6 times faster. And we now use a microservices based architecture instead of one monolithic Nagios engine. We use microservices based off message queues and distributed data stores. So we'll use RabbitMQ and CouchDB. And we've got an Ansible-based deployer to help you manage your infrastructure as well. So huge improvements on the Opsview architecture when coming from version 5. We've added support, of course, for more modern operating systems, and we retain agent support for any operating system that you currently find in use. And that includes all your AIXs and 6s, AIX 6 and 7, old Solarises, all your Red Hats, all your Windows, all your Ubuntus. So we've got comprehensive support for operating systems, and we've also significantly improved the Opsview monitor front end. So this user interface is hugely improved. So everything's much faster, everything is more consistent. We've actually got a dedicated user experience team who makes a journey through the site, not a journey through the application, when you're configuring things or when we're modifying things or when we're viewing things much quicker, much easier, and we reduce the number of clicks and reduce the amount of time it takes to generally just use Opsview and drive the system on a day-to-day basis. Other big things are that we've hugely improved self-monitoring and resiliency. So Opsview 6 keeps an eye on itself, and if anything looks like it's going to cause an issue, we'll warn you. By that I mean we just monitor our own infrastructure. So I'll monitor our collector, which is as of Opsview 6, it's our term for slaves, and our system itself. So any issues we have with the actual Opsview system get reported here, but as you can see, all of my services seem to be running just fine. Everything's installed into Opsview, and we have dropped the old Nagios user. So if you remember a Nagios user and things being installed into USR local Nagios or var log Nagios, that's different. And we use syslog for controlling our logs instead of Perl. So logs are much more configurable by users, and you can have per component log settings. So like I alluded to back there, we've actually changed some of the terminology. So master and slave type servers are gone, so we've got collectors and orchestrators. No longer have clusters of slaves, we've got monitoring clusters. The old Nagios user is gone, and things that used to live in USR local Nagios now live in Opsview and usually in core utils. And your web app now lives at Opsview web app. And as of Opsview 6.2, that's powered by Nginx as opposed to Apache. And we've seen that that's improved performance hugely and made configuration much easier. So we no longer use Apache to power this front end here. This is powered by Nginx. Okay, that takes me nicely into BSM. So this is one of our most popular features, one of our more advanced features that allows us to make a little bit more sense of our environment and the things we're monitoring. So you see, even on this relatively small training system, I've got around 30 hosts in here. We've got our hosts, all of which are all up and running and working quite nicely. But we see we've got a number of criticals, a number of warnings, a number of unknowns. And it's hard to see exactly what the impact of this is going to be. Like, what does all this mean? And this is where BSM comes in. So we've managed to significantly update and improve BSM the last few versions. And BSM allows us to, like I said, make a little bit more sense of our environment. So imagine if I wanted to monitor, say, a sales system, a marketing system, maybe a company website. I can do that by building up a hierarchy of my system. So I can see here, this is what we called our new Opsview, our new BSM view. I can do this if I go back one page. I'll show you the previous view that you might be familiar with, or that classic investigate. This builds up a view of our company website, and we can see that it's made up of an Apache stack, virtualization stack, some database servers, some storage, and some networking. And in both cases, we can see that we've got an availability zone. So what we see here, hopefully you can see on the WebEx, we've got a little gray background to 3 of these systems here and 2 of these systems here. And this indicates that I need at least 2 of those systems to be online to consider this Apache stack functional, and I need 3 out of my 5 database servers to consider the cluster to be functional. See the same thing represented here with the grey outlines, but hopefully you'll agree that this view is much clearer, much nicer than this view, that they are showing the same thing. They're also showing the exact same data that we see here, so it's built up, uses the same host templates, uses the same service checks, and we're monitoring the same systems, but we've built up a service like a company website or a team or a system we use. Using these components, we build up visibility into an overall service. Components make use of host templates, and like we just saw there, they'll understand a little bit of fault tolerance. So what this lets us see is exactly how bad an outage is going to be. So who's it going to affect? Is it going to affect my internal marketing team, or is it going to affect external customers? We can see just what's affected. So is it an email system or or that sales system or that website, and how bad is this impact? What's the actual cost of this outage? Is it just one server going down? Is it just one service check going down? Or does my whole system become affected by this issue? So what I'm going to do is just simulate one of these servers going down. So if I simulate one of these web servers going down, what we'll see in a couple of moments is this goes red. So we can see my website's affected. We can see that it's the Apache stack, but everything's still online. I've still got my green, my website is still accessible, and I'm still within my fault tolerance level. My original view does show me that too. It just shows me that my website's impacted, but it's still green and online. But if we start seeing more issues, if another server goes down or another service check fails, within a few moments we'll see everything go red and everything go red here too. And anything that's been using that component immediately gets affected. So in both views we see things go red, things are offline. This availability metric starts dropping. We can see which two systems are affected, and we can go and try and investigate those outages. We can see if we can see what we need to do to go and take action. So I can see just a couple of things that I broke this using my API. I can also now hopefully fix it. And this should simulate what happens when things come back online. So we're not quite as affected as we were. Got only one of these are now down. So we've gone back to online. Our availability is no longer dropping, and hopefully the third server will come back too, and we'll see everything goes fully green, nothing's impacted, and we're back to full health. It's important to note this was the same service checks, the same host checks that we see here, so the exact same servers, but the BSM view, whether it's this one or it's our classic one, is hopefully a lot more, is a lot clearer than this. We can see, if we've got certain important systems that we really need to keep an eye on, that we're really interested in, then this is what we can use BSM for. And we can build that out going to configuration and then BSM. I'm going to create a component, and we've already seen it in operation. So we'll create a quick BSM component and show us how we build out that BSM hierarchy. So I've got a list of components, and each business service is made up of a number of, at least one of, but as many of these components as you need. And if we're to create a new one, so if I create a new BSM component from scratch, let's do add new, and we'll call it NC July 2020. So imagine this was a component, and I need to select my systems, so I'm going to select one of the host templates that has the service checks I need. So it could be any of these host templates, but for this training course we use BSM specific ones, and I often encourage our customers to do this too. So if you have a BSM specific host template, it's very easy to manage the service checks and the servers that are included. So we pick our host template, we pick the systems we want, we can do all of them or a subset of them, and here's where we pick our allowed to fail, our operational zone. So I need an operational zone of 2/3. So I need 2/3 of my servers to be online to make this work. I know my website can function with, for example, one server down, but when two servers go down, it just can't keep up, and the thing falls over. So for this to be considered online, I have an operational zone of 66.6%. all I do is create that, and then with my newly created component, I can start dragging and dropping that into my full business service. So I can take it from my components drawer or remove it from my components drawer, and if I'm happy about if I'm happy with my full BSM, so I'm happy with how this looks, I'm happy with the hierarchy. So this is how I build out hierarchy as well, so I can drag and drop and move these around. But I've gone for virtualization, networking, storage, database, Apache. Once I'm happy with how this looks, hit update, run a quick apply change to commit those changes into our system, and that's me with a fully configured business service based just off a few host templates, service checks we need, and now I've got my website. If I know that this database server stack is used by both, say, my website and my this marketing system, maybe they share data or maybe they share hardware. If I know that this MySQL stack is shared across those systems, then I just share that component. So I use the same MySQL component in a few places, and that's how we saw when one went down, 3 of them went down because they shared the Apache. Component, and when that Apache stack was impacted, it impacted everything, every single business service which had been configured to use it. So sales stayed up, but obviously the website went down, the engineering system went down, as did this marketing system. So with that, you can see just take me back to BSM summary. When these things do go down, you can see just how bad the impact is. Come on. So you can see that it impacts all 3. So it's this marketing system, this website, and this engineering system. Sales system remains unaffected because it doesn't use that Apache component. If I was to drag the Apache component in, it would start to use it. And we see that they all go offline, and they all have availability impacted when 2 of the web servers go offline. So you get a really instant, immediate view of how badly of how bad an outage is, and the impact of an outage, depending on which service goes down. And I hope you'd agree that it's much clearer than looking at. I can see that 2 web servers are down, and I might know that that's not great, but I don't know just how bad the impact is. I don't know that it's infected internal and external visitors to my company. So with just a few configuration tweaks, you can get an excellent overview of your environment and what's going on. I will say we can also use this in reports, so you can report on BSM availability, and it's really useful in dashboards. So if we are looking at some of our dashboards, we can have BSM summaries in here. I can config overview, and I can pull in my BSM summary and have either my sales system, or I can pick whichever one I want, and I can have that high-level overview with my intuitive view on the same dashboard as, say, low-level metrics and the state of all my hashtags and the current state of my recent events. So I can see what recent events have been doing and how everything is working just at a glance on a few dashboards. So huge potential there when you configure your BSM. Okay, yeah, so this moves us nicely onto our events viewer. The events viewer is an excellent way of getting a filterable overview of what's going on within your Opsview monitor environment. So an overview of all the events within the last 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, all the way back through to a month or however long we've got data for. And it's very filterable, it's clickable, and really easy to use. So if I go to monitoring and then events viewer here, so I've got my monitoring top left, scroll down to events viewer. This takes me to, like we say, a filterable, configurable view of what's going on within my Opsview environment. So I've got the last 6 hours worth of data. I can change that for the last 1 hour, so I can see what's been going on within Opsview within the last, little while, 1 hour. I can make that custom, so I can go back as long as I've got data for. So well into last year, see what's been going on. We see spikes of activity, and we can export these. We can filter these. We can filter these based on specific host groups, on specific BSM groups. I'm going to filter right now on, let's see, maybe databases. See what's been going on all these DBs. I'm going to move that filter, so we'll just see database access for the last 6 hours or so. And if I want to then export this, I can export the raw data, so the raw JSON or CSV or whatever it is I might be using, and open it up in whatever tool I need. So I'll open it up in Excel or my Excel-like tool here and just see what's been going on in all these databases. So I've got the state type, state, host name, ID, and our output. So if I want to then go and graph any of that output or make sense of it in some other tool, this is a nice quick way of getting this data out of Opsview. Along with the filters and the export feature, we've also got the option to turn on this little sound. So whenever a new event comes in, we'll get a little bloop to make us maybe look up at this on a dashboard to see what's been going on. I don't usually leave that on because I'm consistently breaking things in the training environment, but if you wanted to, if you need to be drawn attention to events, you can just by having this little chime on. Really handy, especially if you need to quickly and easily export a bunch of data from Opsview. The events viewer is a great way of seeing what's recently gone on your system. And you can just drag and drop here, can click events, so I can see what's been going on. If I need to see just the criticals, I can click the criticals there. If I need to see when things went okay again, I can click the green events here, and this pulls in on the lower pane all of the most recent events. If I need to see, say maybe a subset of the warnings, I can click these warnings here. See again in a little more detail what's been going on my system. I really like the event viewer. I think it's really useful. It's maybe an underused feature, so if you don't use it too often, the events viewer is a great way to just see what events are happening right now on your Opsview system. We can filter on service check, business service, host group, and host, and yes, we can export that data as JSON, as PDF, as CSV. Another excellent way of getting information out of Opsview is going to be our graphing center. So the events viewer shows us service check data and the actual events happening on the system. The graph center allows us to build a consolidated set of historical graphs in just a few clicks. So we can go from top left again, we'll go to monitoring and then graph center. And it doesn't look like there's a huge amount going on here. So I've got no graphs, it's a big white screen, there's nothing here. But as soon as I go to create, I can, in just a few clicks, get some useful information on any of my service checks that have performance data. So if I'm looking for a specific service check, so maybe I'm looking for CPU stats on some of my hosts, I can see here that I've got four hosts. I can choose which systems I'm interested in. I can choose specific web servers, or indeed some of those systems I added yesterday. So I can see CPU data for these two systems in just a few clicks. I can do the same thing for disk usage. So any system that's got disk usage in here, I can then add both to our system. So I've got a CPU stats and should have disk usage. On the same set of graphs, and when I'm happy with those graphs, I can decide which system I want to view. I can decide the number of, how long I want to see stats for. I can turn those stats on and off. And then there's a few useful things I can do here. I can, again, export as a PNG, so I can download that as an image if I want to. I can save the actual raw graphing data as JSON or XLL. And then I can copy to dashboard, which I think is another useful feature. So if I've made this graph of a number of systems I'm interested in, I can go to copy to dashboard. And what that does is takes this graph and adds it to my most recently edited dashboard. So whichever dashboard I was last editing, it takes this graph and adds it to. I can then drag and drop it to a different dashboard if I want to, and then make more changes to it. So if I want to add hosts or add other service checks or add other systems that have this data, I can do that. I can prune certain systems. I can add different checks. So maybe I want to graph the CPU on these two along with the disk on these two. I can do just that. So I add another data set here, hit save, and I've got my new graph right there. Really easy to play around with if you want to take that graphing data and add it to a dashboard for long-term usage or long-term viewing. It gives you just that little bit more control. Again, the Graph Center is one of my favorite things in Opsview. It's one of the most easily used but powerful tools to open and play with, to create and play with graphs. So I created one last week. So if I open this graph, these are existing graphs that I made. So we can see that I've saved quite a few. So I can open save graphs. I can then share them with whoever I need to share them. Or indeed I can copy this information straight to a dashboard as well. So maybe I quite like my bytes in, bytes out, and simultaneous connections graphs. I can copy that to a dashboard. And this one again will go straight to my most recently edited dashboard. And if I don't like whichever one it ended up on, I just move it to the next one. So here I can see I've got my series. I can make that visible if I need to. Right next to my overall service, my event viewer, and my hashtag cell viewer. So a nice easy way of creating a set of graphs that will complement other data alongside my dashboards. So if we see these spikes again, we'll very quickly know maybe the cause of some of these criticals, or some maybe a component goes offline here. We see the corresponding spike here, and we'll know just why. So when you combine dashboards and the graphing center, it will be pretty powerful. And of course, you can share those graphs and save them with colleagues and email them and annotate them. We can graph data based on a host or a hashtag or service checks, of course, but we can also create the graphs out of specific BSM components. So if those BSM components create graph data or create performance data or have anything numerical coming in, we can create a view based on create a graph based on that view. Okay, I think this brings us on to users and roles. So when you are configuring your Opsview system, you can either use local users, so you can have a completely independent set of users, Opsview specific, with local authentication to this system. So I can create local users that Opsview stores in its database, and any authentication is against that user. But we can also use LDAP or Active Directory if we need to. So your LDAP and or Active Directory roles can be used to assign roles to users within Opsview, and then we can use those roles in Opsview to restrict access. Think of roles as groups in Linux or Windows or in anything you're familiar with. So instead of setting individual access rights, all we do is, let's accidentally scroll my mouse too quickly, sorry. All we do is define a set of access rules and then apply them to a subset of users. And we can restrict access to BSM groups, to various hashtags, host groups, service groups, and overall admin of your Opsview system. And it's hugely configurable when it comes to what permissions we can set and what options we have. So as we see here, I'm logged in as this administrator user. So this is me. I'm logged in as admin. But for the full training courses that we deliver, I have student logins that are based off a small LDAP server, so that they can log into a web front end and Opsview using the same credentials. So we have an LDAP role here for our students and local roles for other users. The admin is a local role, as is this new user. We just called him new user. It's got very, very similar permissions to the student role. One big thing to note is that if you edit a local user, you've got the option to change password, change role, and a few other things that you won't have if you try and edit an LDAP-based user, because all of that is controlled by LDAP. So the authentication is managed by LDAP or Active Directory. If I change that to local again, I get to set the password. But if I use the LDAP realm, then I'm handing that authentication off to your LDAP server. So once you've chosen that and configured it using a simple XML file that lives on your Opsview orchestrator on your main Opsview system, you can then configure the role, so decide what access your user actually gets. So you see, if we look at let's have a look at this student role here and see what options we have available to us. So we can decide on allowing access to various BSM screens, whether or not I get access to my configure components, configure BSMs overall, whether or not I can view all business service groups, edit them all, or indeed individual ones, individual BSMs, whether I can grant, whether I let users view or access anything. And I've got status information here, so am I allowed to view status on some or all objects? Can I use the test service check button, which is incredibly useful, please? So can I use this? Let's try one of these. Can we use this button here? So if that's unselected, then the arguments that you see here aren't visible. So if this permission here is removed, then your users won't be able to see that black box. Whether or not allow people to access the hashtags or dashboards, or do it for specific host groups, service groups, or indeed specific hashtags, and then whether or not I allow access for configuration of those objects. So it might be that I'm allowed to view certain things but can't change certain things, or I'm allowed to view everything. So I'm allowed to view all host groups, but I can't modify certain BSM settings, for example. And then finally, we've got the option to set our own passwords and to reload. So for those of us on yesterday, whenever a change like this is made, we need to apply changes. We need to reload Opsview, and not all users will have this privilege. So if you don't see the option to reload after making a change, you don't see this one in the top corner and this yellow thing here, then it's because your role, the user your role is assigned to, does not have that access. So once you're happy with the configuration of your role, we can then assign that to a new user. So when we're adding a user, when we're adding a user, we just go to the Users tab. We add new in the top right as always. So okay, so we've got our example new user. We get to pick our role. So I can pick the student role, and I can decide whether I want this July user to use our integrated LDAP, or for this to be a local user. If I go for local, I can set the password as I love Opsview, and then a number. And then that's my new user created using that role. So whatever options I have, in that role, this new user has just picked up. And if I was to log in with this July user, you'd see slightly different options to what you see right now as me with my administrator user and all privileges. So really easy to manage. I will show you just very quickly where the LDAP configuration file lives. It's in Opsview deploy etc user vars, and you'll see here our LDAP settings. So I've got my address, my LDAP server, our encrypted password, and our group mappings. So this includes a few other options which I can't go into right now, but we'll see we've got some default settings here and some other overrides, but our LDAP lives in this section of our config file. And once that's been set once, you never have to set it again. You just modify a quick file to set your LDAP config up. Okay. So what I think we're going to do is we'll create a service check, and then we should hopefully have some time for fine-tuning alerts, and we'll look at the API. A quick recap for those of us on yesterday, or for those of us borderline familiar with Opsview. There are 4 types of service checks, and they are our active checks, our passive checks, and our SNMP polling and SNMP traps. By far the most common type of check is an active check, and that's what I will run through setting up today. We're going to create a brand new service check. We're going to look at some of the options, and we're going to pick our plugin. We're going to group them by service groups, and the quickest way to add a service check to multiple hosts is to use host templates. So if I create a new service check and add it to our host template, any system that's already using that host template will start running that service check. So our entry point is, of course, settings and service checks. We must choose the type, so we're going to choose a plugin check. And when we're building a new one, the best thing to do is maybe use an existing one as an example to get a feel for the arguments required. So let's go to configuration and then hosts, and we're going to first create a brand new host. So what I'm going to do is create a copy of entity test host, this one here that I created yesterday. I'm just going to clone it off, and we're going to call this entity test host 3. And we see that it's using this entity host template June. So this is a host template that's already been assigned to this system. So as soon as I create and apply the changes to this system will start using, this host will start running whatever service checks are assigned to this host template. And we can check what they are by clicking on the host template itself and then navigating through to see what checks exist. We've got our operating system and our 5 base Unix agent service checks, so very basic resource usage checks so far. So whilst that's running in the background, we can then create a new service check. So I'm going to go to configuration and service checks. And I'm going to look for my service group. So I know that I've got a service group I created in June. I know that it's got this service check in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this service check as inspiration to create a new one. So I'm going to go to add new. I'm going to choose plugin check. I'm going to call it NC July check. I'm going to add it to my existing host template. And I'm going to add it to this existing service group. So this means I can find it and that my systems will already will immediately start running it. We're then going to pick our plugin. So I'm going to choose the same plugin just because I know that that works really well. And all this example plugin does, and MOPQRST, all our little plugin does is check the time difference and compares it to epoch time. So we can see how much of a difference there is between standard Unix system time. I know that I can use -h for a host address, and this in dollars tells Opsview to use the host address of whichever host this service check is running against. I also know I need to give it a custom port of 22 because I've had to do that before. And as soon as that's done, I hit submit changes, and now I've got a new service check in this service group. Maybe I want to modify some of the advanced settings. So maybe I want to, once I'm happy with my plugin and arguments, I want to check on some of our advanced settings. So I can automatically hashtag this service check. So if I want to view that service check in a list of hashtags, I can. I can increase the max check attempts or the retry interval. So maybe I'll have 5 for this specific service check. I can decide what I want to be notified on, so whether I want just warnings or criticals or everything, whether or not the sensitive arguments are viewed. So if I consider this service check to have sensitive arguments, if I consider this to be something that I don't want users to see, I can click sensitive arguments and have it so that they're not visible to users and not visible in the UI at all. And there are a few other options. I don't have time, so sadly we don't have time to go into all of them, but once we've got our advanced options set, got my new service check, it's assigned to my host template. I click apply changes, and as soon as that takes place, so as soon as that apply change is complete, I'll have a new service check running against the new host, part of my new part of my existing host group. Hopefully everyone followed that along, but if there are any questions, please do use the WebEx chat and I will happily clarify. They should live in our sandbox. We can see that my new system is in place. It's running my new host template, and when this finishes, we should see that it runs a slightly different version of this service check. I might have to double check the host template, but we'll see in a moment. Okay, so there's my July check. It's just started to run. All our service check really is, as always, is just telling Opsview which plugin to run and with what arguments. So maybe I would use a different plugin, or I want to use slightly different arguments. We can use the same plugin with different arguments to run a different version of the plugin. So maybe I want a warning threshold that's much different. So my warning threshold can be 100 seconds, for example. So I would have a different service check, but the same plugin and just slightly different arguments. We see that all through Opsview. So we see that with our database MySQL checks. These are the same plugin with different arguments. A service check really is just, like I say, telling Opsview which plugin to use, how often to run it, and with what settings. And it's the plugin that then reports all of the interesting stuff back to Opsview. All of the interesting stuff we see up here, all of the interesting stuff we see here, that all comes from the plugins. And there's nothing mystical about plugins. The plugins just live in this directory. So this listing, this output, is the exact same list of plugins we see when we create a service check. So it's the exact same list of plugins that I see here. Hold on, clicked the wrong button, forgive me. The exact same list of plugins we see here. And they initially live on your orchestrator, your main server, and then they are distributed out to any collectors where they're required using our Ansible tool. But they're just they're scripts, really easy to create your own one. Sometimes they're binary, so we can't do anything with them. Sometimes they are human readable Perl scripts, and other times they're bash scripts. So as long as they'll run on your system, you can write your plugins in any language you want. So once you've selected your plugin and set your settings, that's all you need to do to create a service check. And then I added it to an existing host template, and that meant that any system running that host template then picked up that new July service check. And this one here too should have it, yeah. So any system that was running that host template automatically started running the brand new service check. So do be aware of that when you modify your host template. The same thing is true if I go to host templates and remove a service check, then that service check stops running on all hosts that that initially picked it up. So be very careful, or just at least be aware when you are modifying your host templates. So if I take a service check out of this one, and apply changes, we'll see much fewer, 3 fewer service checks running on those systems. Okay, so a quick recap. BSM, what we've covered today, we've covered BSM, graphing and historical events. We've covered users and roles, and we've created a brand new service check. So BSM gives us that higher level view of our environment, includes some fault tolerance and some intelligence about our system. The graph center and the events viewer allow us to pull historical events out of Opsview and then view them in a useful way. So we can also export that data to use in our own tools or to analyze at a later date. We've seen that we have huge amounts of control over user access levels, really granular, and we can integrate that with our third-party LDAP or Active Directory servers. And we've seen just how easy it is to configure a service check from scratch to run at specific times of the day using our check period, to run against specific hosts. And one thing, I forgot, or to run event handlers. I've got time to show you event handlers because they are really, really useful. So if I go to our sandbox and pick one of our systems, let's take a look at this, edit config for service check. We'll see we've got the option to set an event handler. And an event handler is really just a script. So if I was to put in a name of a script here, so restart apache.sh, for example, I've got a script that will automatically restart a service on my target servers if we detect this service check fails, for example. Whenever this check fails, from now on, we will try and run that script, and that script would have to live in our event handlers directory here. So I've got an example one just called entity handler, and all that does is SSH to something and restart Apache. So if you want to be able to run a shell script or a Python script or a little program every time a service check fails, you can do that using event handlers, and that's also really very useful to take automated remedial action if we detect a service check going down. If you want to avoid waking people up in the night, or you want to avoid callouts, and you know that a certain action will fix an issue, you can just script it and edit as an event handler. And that's a really powerful, useful tool that I know a lot of our customers make good use of. I think that brings us to the end of my content. Again, I will reiterate that host checks and service checks use plugins. But Helen, do we get any questions?
Hey Neil, thank you for that. That was a whistle-stop tour through advanced administration. So for those that have liked what they've seen, they've learned a lot. Neil runs the full 3-hour class. So if you visit opsview.com and go to professional services, you can see the schedule that's coming up for the full training class. There's one question that's come through to me privately. A couple of screenshots looked unfamiliar. What version is Neil running?
All right, so I am running our latest version, which is our cloud version. So we've got cloud version is Opsview 6.4 and our on-premise version is Opsview 6.3. Both of them look very similar, so 6.3 looks very similar to 6.4.
So I guess, Neil, the next question after that is how would one manage to upgrade to the latest version?
Well, I will say, depending on environment size, often the best way to upgrade is to simply engage Opsview professional services. So alongside these training courses, me and colleagues do numerous Opsview upgrades. We'll make sure it goes smoothly and quickly. And often, so I mean, we do these day in, day out. So often the best way to get them completed successfully is just to go via Opsview professional services. If you fancy trying it yourself, it is fully documented up on knowledge.opsview.com, and we've got a new installer to help with it. So if you go to knowledge.opsview.com, we can upgrade using the steps here. Yeah, there.
Right, fantastic. Thank you, Neil, for answering those. I don't think we've got any other questions coming through. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will be sending you the recorded version out tomorrow. Have a good day. Thank you, Neil, very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.